lots of other kinds of organizations, but I've been talking essentially about businesses, to think more carefully about what they do in the broad environment within which they operate and the ways in which they're contributing to the common good. And I don't believe that going back to an earlier, more passive world where you could get away with more, be less challenged, is a good thing. That is not to say that there aren't plenty of difficulties about the way this all works out in practice, and it's certainly true to say, to go back to comment to the front, that this puts a very big burden on the shoulders of those who are in those roles trying to take the business forward.
There's two questions here, I think.
In a sense, there's not a lot new about this, because 200 or 300 years ago, the companies that were set up by Quakers were based on values.
Dead right.
And they were very, very successful because of that.
Yeah.
So, do you think we should return to that sort of value?
In the sense, there is not a lot that's new. That's absolutely right. And it's absolutely right that in the 19th century there are shining examples of corporate social responsibility, often Quaker, whose experiences we ignore at our peril. Which is not to say that the 19th century was a wonderful example of a capitalist system working the way you'd want it to work. It was, after all, also a period of a class structure that we would now think totally unacceptable, and treatment of child labour in sweatshops, etc., that we would just think unspeakable. So I wouldn't want to get too starry-eyed about the 19th century, but nonetheless, it is true that there were certain businesses and certain communities there that had a very strong sense of their responsibility in the business to ensure that it was making a contribution to the common good.
Thank you. There's a question on the right there, and then there's one at the back, which I think will be the last one.
Okay, you mentioned both boards of management and short-term and long-term responsibilities and attitudes. So two questions. First question, is the current governance system satisfactory so that boards do actually force or encourage, whatever word you want to use, the management of the company to adopt the policies that you think are absolutely necessary? The second question, with respect to short-term versus long-term thinking or planning, does this herald or indicate a return, as we see to some extent, to the private corporation, which can indeed plan for the long term, as opposed to the public corporation, which has to report to Wall Street every quarter?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting pair of questions, that. On the whole, I think in this country's corporate governance code is, broadly speaking, fit for purpose. Plainly, that's not saying, and therefore all of the decisions that they have to take are easy, but I'm actually a believer in a unitary board system. I'm a believer in the separation of chairman and CEO roles. I'm a believer in limited terms. 9 years for independence is the way. I mean, you can debate whether it's 9 years or 8 or 10, but I'm certainly a believer in having a system for that. And on the whole, I don't think it's particularly broken, isn't in need of a great deal of fixing. But it is the case, of course, that the Financial Reporting Council every now and then does review how the code is working. To the second point, or actually related, is whether the responsibilities of investors have received as much attention as they need. When you consider that public companies are owned, typically the larger public companies are owned by the same 20 or so major shareholder groups, it becomes a quite important question whether those investors, who are, after all, not investing their own money, they're investing generally your or my money, because they're investing pension funds and in savings plans and such like, are they, in their dialogue with the companies, encouraging the right kind of broader sense of responsibility for which I've been arguing, or are they focused on the short-term performance, the quarterly reporting that you've just referred to? And there is plenty of work to be done in this area. The responsibility, the code of responsibility that was brought in recent years for the investors, the stewardship code, sorry, not the stewardship code that was brought in for investors, I don't know how effective that has been in encouraging a focus on a longer-term approach to investment. And it is still the case that the average tenure, the average period of ownership of a share on the London Stock Exchange is less than a year, as it is, by the way, on all the other major stock exchanges. We think of Germany as the great place where companies have a longer-term focus and less of a short-termist so-called Anglo-Saxon approach, but actually the same is true of the Deutsche Börse. The average ownership of a share on the Deutsche Börse is also less than a year. So I think there are issues in that area of what are the responsibilities of investors, which is, if you like, a kind of chapter 2 of everything we've been talking about this evening.
I think there's one last question at the back there on the right. If it's disappeared into cyberspace, oh, wait a minute, there's one. I think you've already asked the question, sir, haven't you? No, I think probably what we should do, because we're going to welcome you to have a drink and to talk with Lord Green in the Knapp Gallery straight after this. So I think it just remains me to say two things. One is that, and the second is to ask Enrique from the Students' Union to say a few words, because as you know, our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Cooper, is very keen that we bring as many eminent guests here to talk with you as possible, and we also want to make sure that as many eminent students come to listen to the eminent guests. And thanks very much to the Students' Union this time. Enrique, if you say a few words, that has happened, and thank you for all coming this evening. Enrique.
Hello, everyone. So, as Professor John Drew said, I'm Enrique. I'm part of the Student Union, involved with academic events, and I would just like to take a brief word to thank everyone who has made this happen. So that would be everyone at Regent University, including Caroline, Andy, the whole alumni team, obviously Professor John Drew, and Lord Green. Thank you very much for this very, very enlightening talk. I think people are being very keen on having a chat in the Knapp Gallery about this, discussing it further, and I think the students have been very, very pleased to welcome you here at the university. Thank you very much.